And I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. I don't doubt that there are, terrorist cells in our country right now. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, it's not just a possibility. In fact, it is a reality. I was speaking to a few people about this subject lately, about how there's Islamic training camps in America where they have these huge pieces of property in upstate New York, Texas, where they found one. They had a school bus on their property, and it was riddled full of bullets, and got FBI reports. We've had a lot of people, Muslims, like 3 or 4 different occasions where they broke into water treatment plants, and they had to get through 3 or 4 layers of security. I mean, they cut fences, they cut padlocks, and what were they doing there? Were they trying to poison the water? Then we had these substations that are being shot up with precision.
I read about that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and Navy SEALs even come out and said this is exactly how we would do it if we were trying to do an attack on the electric grid. And then we had the incidents over at the Mexican border where they illegals cross over. We found some Korans and I don't know what it's called, but that like towel or rug that they use to pray on. We found some of those. So it is very plausible, the scenario that you're talking about. And Iran used to be a huge empire. It used to be Persia, which I'm sure that part of their aspirations is to get back to their once great empire. And now that they have nuclear capabilities, that might be a possibility. I mean, Iraq is much weaker now, without Saddam Hussein. And
actually, it's funny you say that because I play on that as part of Iran's, how they slowly absorb the Middle East. And what you just said about Iraq was one of them, is that they didn't have to, in the book, again, this is fiction, but to me it's plausible, that they didn't even have to invade Iraq. They didn't have to declare war on Iraq. All they had to do was infiltrate, into their own into the Iraqi government, and they slowly just they took over with very little, with hardly any fight, and in the result they ended up absorbing, all of Iraq's resources and all that. And then once they consolidated that power, they just expanded further like a virus across the Middle East.
Yeah, they will be the Arab Union, they'll be called. I was talking before about the super states. They'll take over all the countries around them. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Saudi Arabia. I know in our media they play each other off against each other, but I don't really trust our media anymore because I know they're all bought up by the same people who are trying to bring in these super bloc countries, and I feel like they feed us the narrative, and not too many people have critical thinking like yourself who can see around the curve and put the pieces together for themselves. I try to do that. I go to other countries' websites and I'll use Google Translate, and then the stories just don't match up. So that's my theory, that there is a international elite who are planning these events so they can form super bloc countries. And I think we'll see the collapse. We will definitely see it in our lifetime. You may be right about the date. That sounds pretty plausible to me with the way things are going. In your book, there's 2 major hurricanes. We saw with Katrina and Hurricane Sandy all the damage that those storms did, and our government was ill prepared to take care of the people afterwards. Yeah,
I played on Sandy happened after I had already written the novel, but I played off of Hurricane Katrina as kind of the basis for if you think back to 2005, I mean, we're a relatively stable nation at the time. And, you would think that we would have had the resources to be able to, for that wouldn't happen. And I saw a lot of it firsthand because I live 30 miles from the Texas-Louisiana border. I-10 shoots straight over to New Orleans. And it's horrible to call them refugees, but that's really what they were. We had quite a few people from New Orleans that kind of filtered into Southeast Texas, and they're still living here to this day. And, I saw it for myself, and I've worked law enforcement for the past 17 years, and, I've talked to a lot of my, colleagues that actually were sent to New Orleans, to evacuate, like the county jails and to evacuate, the prisons out there. And they said it was like a third world country. And
yeah,
I took that scenario and I again, I applied it, 15 years, or at the time it was 15, now it's 13, but 13 years down the road. And I thought, what if, our country was broken, just in shambles, barely hanging onto a thread? What would happen if a Category 5 hurricane destroyed Florida? And when the book opens, that's exactly what's happening in Florida. Now, of course, I'm using, artistic license, and of course, it's always fun to exaggerate, but I made the hurricane the most powerful hurricane on record. Shattered all the records, and they said, the way I had it written in the book, that if there were such a thing as a Category 6, that's what this hurricane would have been, because the way the path that I chose for it, it's off the coast of Florida, forms out in the ocean. It comes in like a wrecking ball, goes back out to sea, gathers more strength, and then comes back again. And I think I had it doing that probably 4 times, and it just laid waste to the entire state of Florida.
Wow.
Demolished it from one end to the other. And now what I thought was interesting, and what I think, I wouldn't put it past, our government today, but in the fiction of the book, Florida, of course, Florida's destroyed, but the government basically controls the media and has like a media blackout because they don't want the rest of the country to be terrified that, we just had one of our own states wiped off the map, and, our country can't do anything to help them. And I look back to Katrina, like I said, we, had the manpower and the resources to intervene and do something, but we didn't. I mean, let's face it. I mean, history speaks for itself. I mean, look back at it, and you had an entire town underwater, and nobody showed up. And what I wanted to really key in on was, what if something worse were to happen? What if a hurricane just wiped out Florida, and we don't have anybody to do anything? I mean, not one single thing. The entire state is turned into a apocalyptic wasteland, and it's left that way. And then I figured I'd step it up a notch. I mean, right on the heels of that, maybe a month later, another Category 5 hurricane is in the Gulf, and it's headed for Texas, and it's looking to be the same thing that happened in Florida, And again, the government at the time is broken. The nation is in shambles, and they're ill prepared to be able to, to render any kind of aid or anything, reconstruction, nothing. They can't do anything.
So if Texas gets if it takes a beating like that, I bet you the security at the border would become even more lax than it already is, which would allow for even more terrorists to get into the country. Exactly. Wow. Wow, these books look great, man. I know you were talking before about how if a book's really got to hold your attention, and I'm the same way. I grew up with video games and TV, And if a book isn't good, I'll put it down within the first 20 pages. And both your books are just great. They remind me of something like Escape from New York or Escape from L.A.
Yeah, I love those movies.
Yeah,
maybe not L.A. too much, but New York was a classic.
Yeah, the first one was good. The extreme weather, we've been getting a lot of more and more intense weather. And they say, oh, that's just because we didn't have as much, news and we couldn't cover it. But there was always been these type of storms, and I don't think so. I think they're getting more and more intense as time goes on. And what are your thoughts on weather weapons? The military released a report saying that they wanted to own the weather by 2020. And
wow, I wasn't aware of that.
Oh yeah, during the Vietnam War, we used weather modification to flood the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the supply lines.
Yeah.
Yep, so we were already modifying the weather in the 1960s. And I think China modified some of their weather for their Olympics.
Wow.
Yeah. All that HAARP stuff that they talk about in the conspiracy forums, well, it turns out the science is there, and it's actually true that they can heat up certain parts of the ionosphere and steer. They can actually steer hurricanes, and they got the underwater tsunami bombs that they tested in World War II. They were
yes.
They could take out an entire coastal city with an underwater. I think it's like an underwater nuke, and it just creates a ripple, and it creates a tsunami. So they're saying weather is one of the most powerful weapons that could ever be used. It's even more powerful than nuclear weapons. I mean, a big hurricane.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. A big hurricane could be the force of several of today's nuclear bombs, and it could take out Florida or Texas if it's large enough.
Exactly. And yeah.
It's scary because we've already seen a little taste of it, and with the way things are going, it looks like it's going to get worse.
Exactly. And, when you really think about it, I mean, hurricanes or any type of weather event, it's not so much the weather itself that really harms us. It's the damage to the infrastructure, the immediate infrastructure that really cripples us. Roads are closed down, the power grid, gets, thrown off balance, and and you think about it, you shut down the roads. I mean, that's the lifeblood of our country. That's what keeps us, moving from point A to point B. It's what, all of our commerce, our supplies, everything is from the infrastructure. And
sure.
You take down, if you take down the infrastructure, if you take down like the interstate highway system, I mean, that would cripple us as well. And that's something else that I played on. One of the things that the Silent Warriors, the fictional terrorists in the book, is one of their key targets is just that, the interstate highway system. They blow up bridges, overpasses, and they shut down freeways. You do that, well, your grocery store is not going to be stocked with food. The gas stations aren't going to have gas at the pumps if you shut down, the interstate. And
And
exactly.
We're already dealing with an aging infrastructure.
Exactly.
And, there's been a lot of mysterious train derailments, and, we don't know if it's from aging infrastructure, or one of the theories is that tectonic plate movements.
Yes.
Another thing is growing Earth theory, that the Earth is actually growing. And that's why you see the stretches, like the stretch marks on the seafloor. And when the Earth grows, even if it just grows, by a few 100 feet each year, that throws off, we got to reset. We know what's happening because every 6 months, the Department of Defense has to reset all the GPS satellites.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You're right.
So, but how many of those are from terrorist attacks that we don't know about? Trying to derail trains and stuff like that.
Exactly.
It's been happening a lot more lately.
And you say that, it's like, how many of those are from, a terrorist attack? And, the thing that really troubled me, we mentioned it earlier, was I don't know if it was